Is Icon encouraging people to go back into Opal to reduce their costs? Let's have a look. Hello everyone, welcome to this episode of Heiser Says. Now, I thought I'd go through this article here that's written by Stephanie Bido on the 17th of January about the builder's worksheet reveals how many units remain empty in the building. Also, how many they need to do work on. Now, I read through the interim investigation report, and in that report, one of the conclusions that was derived was that the builder needed to ensure the building was structurally sound before occupancy could reoccur. And remember, this report was prepared on information with limited access to everything. Everything hadn't been received, and they would also want recommendations from a unbiased engineer to check everything. Now, they also say the building is structurally sound, so that should be fine. But you also have to realize that, in an apartment with work going on all around you in the building, just with vibrations through the concrete, that can have amenity issues and sound issues and just comfort issues that you don't really want to have to put up with. Now, builders think in terms of days. Okay, days cost them money. Days are delays. Now, for a construction contract, you have a thing called liquidated damages. So say you've got your construction program needs to be finished by a certain day, but for some reason or whatever, the builder doesn't meet those days. So then you can charge the builder liquidated damages. Now, that's not a penalty. It's not a penalty. It's not a punishment. It's for reasonable costs. So say you're building an extension on a house, for example, and you can't occupy the building until the extension is finished. But the builder's been delayed by, for things due to their fault by a month. So you could reasonably charge the builder or claim the cost for you to maybe stay in a particular rental accommodation for an extra month. You can't charge them 30 grand just for the hell of it. It has to be reasonable and fair. But that still adds up to the builder because their margins aren't as insane as people normally think, and it just chips away and away and away. Now, often if it's beyond the builder's reasonable control, then they can't get charged liquidated damages, but it depends on the contract and the conditions that are in place. But in this situation, I would be shocked if the builder isn't incurring some costs because of the damage associated with the building and having to accommodate these people outside of the building, because it still is within the defects liability period of the building. You normally have a 1-year period, maybe even 2-year period, depending on the complexity of the building. Sometimes even longer, sometimes shorter on smaller jobs, where the builder has to come back and do the repairs. Now, I had a viewer contact me via email saying they wanted to do, get a spec home and those type of things and ask for advice. One thing you want to consider with all the master builder contracts is the defects liability period and the period of when you can identify a defect. That's stacked, let's just say, more towards the builder than towards you. So often if you go with one of those standard contracts, pay a couple of $100 and get a lawyer to make some special conditions or to prepare a fairer contract, an Australian standard one. Get your own professional advice. Don't just always go with what's handed in front of you. That's including from me. So let's have a read through this article and a little bit of a discussion. So, a former resident in the troubled Opal Tower has captured the true extent of the cracked building's problems. During a recent visit to the Sydney high-rise, Chris Abram has spotted builder Icon's remediation worksheet and was horrified to see the amount of red on the page, indicating units that residents cannot return to. While previous reports have said 50 units were gutted, 105 are highlighted as red in the list of 397 apartments. But Icon said not all 105 residents require remediation work, with some being in close proximity to units that did. Okay, this makes perfect sense, just with noise and the issues that can cause to people occupying a space. The noise caused in construction is much louder than normal conversation noise, and what you'd have between two sole occupancy units, two apartments, to buffer the noise between people living there day to day is different to what you'd need for, jackhammers and cutting concrete and those type of things. It would not be very comfortable. A significant number of these are in close proximity with apartments where work will be carried out, and so to ensure amenity for residents, these two will be kept vacant. That kind of sucks for people that's living in those apartments and are probably, they're saying that people are arguing trying to get out of leases and being pushed to still pay rent. This, I would put an argument against that, going, well, the builder has said that these have to remain vacant. That's enough of an argument. I'd fight him based on that. Mr. Abram returned to the building with his dad to check on his belongings, having not returned since the evacuation week on Christmas Eve. He immediately attempted to break his lease after the second evacuation days later because he did not want to go back, and remains in an ongoing disagreement with his property manager because he never got the termination in writing. Now, I'll give it to him in writing and backdate it. Once I heard there was a 10-day period to not return, I submitted my termination notice, he said. The real estate doesn't want to accept the idea that my unit is uninhabitable. Mr. Abram has complained to the Fair Trade New South Wales because an agreement cannot be reached. A spokesman for Fair Trade said since December 27, the department had received 137 inquiries and 10 complaints relating to Opal. They have primarily been from tenants requesting information on breaking their lease or their responsibilities associated with paying rent while they are unable to reside in the building. Mr. Abrams said his concern was safety and the fact parties sent in to investigate the problem had not been in agreement. When the news first broke out, my 2 cats were still in the building, he said. On Christmas Day, I got my cats and left immediately. I didn't want to spend any more time in there. The things that are most concerned to myself and most other residents is they didn't really give an opinion on residents moving back in. They said designers must ensure some criteria are met. Well, yes, if he's talking to the interim report, yeah, there is an assessment that needs to get done because loading has changed in the building with the damage. And I doubt they've done that already. It's confusing because the builder has issued a statement to say it's safe to move back in, but before you move back in, this criteria must be met. Well, yeah. The builder's obviously doing it because they want to get people in there because it's costing them money for every person that's not. Mr. Abrams said while he believed the government's investigators might have been less biased and taken greater precautions, no one would give a straight answer. Well, yeah, he should read the report himself. Give that to the real estate property manager. Going, here you go. Nah, sorry, bye. Take you to court. Screw you. They're not so direct to say the place is unsafe to inhabit, so the real estate jumps on that to say you can't break your lease. Yeah, whatever, real estate, you go live there. Residents still have no timeline for when they can return to their apartments, despite the government's report declaring the building is structurally sound. People continue to live in temporary accommodation more than 3 weeks after the first cracks were noticed on the 36-story building. An interim report released on Tuesday ruled out dodgy materials and extreme weather causing the large cracks on Christmas Eve. I've done a video on that report. If you haven't watched it, I suggest you make yourself a coffee or listen to it as a podcast in the car because it goes through the whole thing, and it's quite interesting to see what the actual concerns are, what was raised by the engineers that went and did the investigation. Numerous construction design problems were detailed, including reinforcing bars in some areas being the wrong size. Yeah, and that's a huge problem. And panels being the wrong size. While we've isolated the probable cause to localized structural design and construction issues, we need more information to make definitive conclusions about the cause or causes of the damage, the report authors Professor Hoffman, Carter, and Foster said. More work is also needed before we can provide recommendations of what needs to happen to avoid incidents like this in the future. They recommend independent and qualified structural engineers be contacted to check final proposals in detail before major rectification work begins. That is quite sensible. Opal Tower Body Corporate Chair Shady Askander said hundreds of residents won't consider moving back until a comprehensive review of the building is completed. The fair trading spokeswoman said if tenants was required to temporarily move out of a property because it had been destroyed or it was wholly or partially uninhabitable, the rent could be waived or reduced. Whether any rent is payable at all, if so, the amount payable will depend on the extent of the damage and the amount of use the tenancy has of the property. Yeah, they've got no use of the property, so it's unreasonable to expect them to pay rent for that period. If the property is deemed safe, habitable, and the tenant can move back into the property, the tenancy agreement cannot be terminated. But it hasn't clearly been deemed safe, has it? Unless the landlord and tenant mutually agree to end the tenancy without penalty, break lease fees may apply. To negotiate an agreement, tenants are encouraged to contact their landlord agent in writing. If you're unable to reach an agreement, tenants or landlord services can access Fair Trade's free tenancy and real estate compliance services. Fair Trade will contact the parties involved in an attempt to negotiate an agreement. One thing to consider and I looked at this in a different video, if you've got children and you're in the building, noise can have an issue on the kids. And you can see here, different levels of noise, and from construction, iron and steel working, that's at a higher level to damage your children. So I'd be putting that as an argument. I'd be putting every bloody thing as an argument to get out of there if you want to. And if you have kids, you can do whatever you can, even for yourself. You can say, this is a construction environment. They're doing remediation work. They can't give me guarantees that, there won't be a decibel limit on the sound that they're performing. So I'm not going to occupy the space until I get it in writing that they give me particular guarantees. Play it back on them. Try that. I'd also contact a lawyer. So guys, it's interesting what's happening here. It's a bit, it's terrible. It's not something you want going on. But really, there's nothing that a potential buyer could have done. You wouldn't have picked this up in a building audit, in a existing conditions assessment. It would have been impossible to identify, impossible to detect. So thank you for joining me for this episode of Heise Says. Let me know what you think. What would you do? What can they do? Should the property managers still be charging rent in this condition? So please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you all again next time. Bye for now.